After 2 failed marriages, single mom Rhonda Heaton of Hayden, Colorado, was feeling a bit discouraged. But that wasn't about to stop the 43-year-old dental assistant from looking for love.
When you get married, you expect to get married and stay married. And with already having been married twice, it really put a little pressure on me to think, I really want to do this forever.
So in the fall of 2005, Rhonda jumped into the online dating pool.
I started reading the profiles and looking at pictures. I was looking for someone who was very honest, caring and giving, someone that wasn't a drinker or a smoker.
Suddenly, Rhonda was drawn to the photo of a familiar-looking 51-year-old man named Robert Cash, a clerk at her neighborhood grocery store.
And I said, oh my gosh, I know who that is. I had seen him in the past and had noticed that he was always really bubbly at work.
Never one to wait, Rhonda left her phone number at the store for Bob, and a couple of days later, the two were sitting down at a restaurant to enjoy their first date.
He was just kind of old school and, like a gentleman from, back when they would open the doors for you.
And at over 6 feet tall, Bob was just Rhonda's type.
I've always been attracted to tall men, and so he was tall and, medium build.
As the two opened up to each other, Rhonda noticed some fun coincidences.
I had mentioned that I like motorcycles, and he had actually bought the motorcycle I was looking to purchase. And then I looked over at him, and we're both picking our tomatoes off of our sandwich exactly at the same time.
Rhonda shared that she was twice divorced with 2 teenage daughters, as Bob explained why he was single with no children.
He had told me that he was a caretaker for his mother. He was living in the same home where his mother had passed away the year before.
I was her caregiver.
I thought that was wonderful. Somebody that would devote their life to taking care of their parents.
But the clincher for Rhonda was when Bob told her he didn't drink.
Sorry about that.
I was really glad to hear that.
I don't drink.
Once I dated a young man that had a severe drinking problem, so I was looking for someone that didn't have those issues.
As the date ended, Rhonda couldn't help but feel she'd landed herself a keeper. And the feeling grew as the relationship took off at warp speed.
My mom was walking on water. I remember she'd come home every day, happier than ever. She was head over heels. She was in love.
So in November of 2005, 2 months and 2 days from their first date, Rhonda and Bob headed to the courthouse to make their union official.
We did it on the sly. I didn't even tell my children. It was kind of exciting.
I felt it was rushed. It was a surprise, not knowing, but she could talk about nothing other than how happy she was.
The newlyweds were excited to start their new life together. So Rhonda and her daughters moved to Bob's house in Steamboat Springs, 24 miles away, to turn his bachelor pad into a sweet family home. Everything seemed perfect until the holidays came around.
Bob's sister had invited us over for Thanksgiving. They were having wine with the meal, and Bob's sister had asked Bob if he wanted a glass. And I said, Bob doesn't drink. And there was a very dead calm in the room. I could feel the awkwardness in the air, and then it just kind of got left at that.
But Rhonda couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on.
I thought, what do they know that I don't know?
And soon she would find out her new husband had some secrets.
She was scared to go back to the house. Something didn't feel right.
I was devastated. Things were spiraling out of control.
In November of 2005, after a stilted introduction to her new husband Bob's family, Rhonda Heaton focused on building a new life as a couple.
I thought that this was the one, and you always hope that's the person you'll be with until you die. Thought that was what I had found.
But just a few months into their marriage, Rhonda started to notice how her teetotaling husband had begun drinking.
He started bringing beer into the home, which, normally is not cause for concern. However, I had made it clear I didn't want to be with someone that drank.
When Rhonda asked him about it, Bob dismissed the occasional beer as just something to take the edge off a hard day at work.
I didn't want to make a big thing out of it, and I kind of took it on initially as it was more my problem than his because I was not comfortable with it.
But over the next few years, after Rhonda's daughters moved out on their own, Bob's drinking was getting out of control.
I would drive the vehicle and look for my sunglasses and find alcohol hidden in the glove box. And when I asked him why he was hiding alcohol, he said, well, sometimes I have a bad day at work and I need a drink before I come home. It concerned me because drinking and driving is so dangerous.
And Rhonda slowly watched her once loving husband become a belligerent bully.
He was very complimentary in the beginning, and then he was saying how fat I was or comments that were rude. It just was so out of character from what I thought he was like.
But the final nail in the coffin came in March of 2010.
Bob lost his job at the grocery store. We were in the middle of a pretty significant recession in the United States, and it was difficult for Bob to get another job. So the loss of that income, however modest it was, it put a strain on their relationship.
Now, Rhonda was the sole provider.
He was sitting at home drinking, and each day that I would come home from work, he would be more and more drunk. He wasn't talking to me about what was happening. It did hurt me. But I was hoping that maybe if he could seek help and get better, that maybe we could work through it, and I didn't want to be divorced again.
So Rhonda reached out to Bob's family for help. Little did she know just how eye-opening that would be.
I called his sister and said, there's a problem. I'm not getting through to him. That is when I found out that he had problems with alcohol in his past. And she said he has always had a drinking problem.
The family's awkward reaction at Thanksgiving now made sense to Rhonda. And it got worse. Rhonda was floored to learn that the story Bob had told her about taking care of his dying mother was a classic spin job.
His sister did say that Bob wasn't actually taking care of his mother, that his mother was actually taking care of him.
And now Rhonda was doing the same thing. Her huge-hearted husband was nothing more than a giant liar.
I don't believe in lying whatsoever. This was not the man I thought I had married, and it was time to go ahead and get out of the relationship.
So in April of 2010, after 4 years of marriage, Rhonda filed for divorce.
I felt bad for my mom. It was another marriage, another relationship, another man who had let her down.
And with Bob unemployed, Rhonda was unable to keep up with the mortgage payments on her own. So they had no choice but to put the house on the market.
I didn't really have anywhere to go, and Bob said that he didn't have anywhere to go either, and neither of us had financial means to move out of the home. So we ended up having to stay in the house together.
But in the weeks that followed, Rhonda's wise fiscal choice would cost her dearly when Bob decided to take matters into his own hands.
Nobody really thought he would do what he did.
He planned to do it step by step.
And I said, oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police.
In April of 2010, Rhonda Heaton filed for divorce from her husband Bob and waited for their home to sell.
I started sitting in my car in the parking lot after work until it was time to come home to go to bed because I didn't want to be in the home with him because he started having kind of peculiar behavior. He would follow me around the house as I did things and not ever be saying anything, just following me the whole time. I told the real estate agent that was selling our home, "You need to get me out of this house."
So Rhonda was grateful to her friend Jim when in June he offered to let her stay at his place in Vegas for a few days. But when Rhonda returned, Bob was waiting.
He was upset with me that I hadn't told him exactly where I went, but we were already filed for a divorce, so we weren't in a relationship.
Then one night when Rhonda came home from work, she got on the phone with Jim.
He was very concerned about me being in the home and thought it would be best if I didn't stay there, but I didn't have anywhere that I could go.
Rhonda thanked her friend, then glanced up to see Bob standing there.
Bob overheard me, and at the end of the phone call, I have a habit of saying "I love you" to my friends, and I think he mistook the way that I said it.
A few hours later, Rhonda crawled into bed, emotionally drained and ready for a good night's sleep. But at 6:30 a.m., Rhonda awoke to a shocking situation.
I heard the bedroom door open, and I could hear him walking into the room. And before I got a chance to ask him why he was in the room, I felt some type of impact. And I wasn't sure what was happening, because in my mind, I was thinking there's an intruder. And I said, "Bob, what was that?"
His answer shook her to the core.
And I said, "Oh my God, get the ambulance, get the police." And then he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he says, "I want you to die." And that's when I realized what exactly had happened, that he had shot me in the back. I couldn't feel my hands at all. I couldn't feel from the knee down. He was pacing up and down in the room, and he was yelling and screaming at me. Just screaming at the top of his lungs.
Bob turned and left the room, leaving Rhonda bleeding in her bed alone. The man who'd once taken Rhonda's breath away was now trying to take her life away.
Rhonda said, "I don't want to die." Within seconds, a shot was fired.
And he says, "There's no going back now."
If you have a story for Who the Bleep and would like to appear on the series, go to investigation.discovery.com. On the morning of June 11th, 2010, Rhonda Heaton lay frozen in shock and fear after her husband Bob Cash shot her in the spine and left her to die.
I laid there and tried to decide, what am I going to do? I wasn't able to move, and I was watching the clock.
Suddenly, Bob returned.
Bob was coming in the room every 20 to 30 minutes and say the same thing.
Are you dead yet?
Every time he came in the room, I held my breath. I just kept telling myself, dead people don't move, and dead people don't breathe. I had so many thoughts. I just knew I couldn't leave this with my kids to live with, seeing their mother die this way.
Almost 2 hours after shooting Rhonda, Bob came in to check on her once again.
And he took my pulse on my neck. And I just kept praying that I was far enough gone that it wouldn't register. And I just held my breath. And he says, "Well, I guess you're dead now."
There's nothing like that now.
Bob left the room again, and before long, Rhonda heard a sharp pounding at the door. Her co-workers, concerned when she didn't show up for work, had called the police.
It was pounding so hard, and I thought, this is it. They're gonna come get me now, and it will be all right.
A few moments later, a shot rang out.
The officers didn't know where the shot was fired at, where it came from, but at that point they retreated to a secure location and called for backup.
A SWAT team arrived, and within minutes they burst through the doors. They found Rhonda clinging to life.
Surprisingly, she was talking and obviously very upset, but still, it's surprising to see somebody with a gunshot wound to the back and still being able to function.
Police discovered Bob in the other bedroom, barely alive. The gunshot they heard was Bob shooting himself.
He had a very obvious gunshot wound to his chest, right over his heart. The gun was laying on the bed next to him, near his hand.
Rhonda and Bob were taken to the nearest hospital. Inside the house, police discovered a series of notes Bob left, including one that began with, "Just lost it."
And he goes on saying why he lost it, what he heard on the phone call. He heard Rhonda say, "I love you." He said, "I lost my house, I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost everything. I don't want to start again." I guess that was his confession.
Unbelievably, they both survived. And after painful surgery to remove the bullet near her spine, Rhonda walked out of the hospital just 3 weeks in front of a jury. Finally, Rhonda came face to face with the man who tried to take her life.
It was terrifying. That was the first time since I had got shot that I was in the same room, and I didn't want to see him or hear his voice.
When Bob took the stand, he surprised everyone by claiming the shooting was an accident.
Bob testified that he was going to try and commit suicide in Rhonda's bedroom, but the gun accidentally went off inside the bedroom and it shot Rhonda. He kind of summed it up like, "I don't know how the gun went off, it just accidentally went off."
But the jury didn't buy it. Bob was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, and in April 2012, he was sentenced to 38 long years in prison.
He planned to do it step by step. Every action he took was planned. That is pure evil.
Bob was very cruel and unfeeling. Didn't seem to bother him that he was killing someone. And I live every day remembering. I don't ever stop remembering it.
Today, Rhonda still struggles with the aftermath of Bob's torture.
I don't like to have my back towards the door. I don't drive very far because I start having severe panic attacks. I don't trust people like I used to. If somebody you married is capable of this, what is everybody else capable of?
Even though she still bears scars, Rhonda doesn't let them define her.
I call it putting it on a shelf. It never goes away, ever. But you try to put it on a shelf because you have to keep going. You just make a new life.
My mom has a set of wings, and if you let them go, she'll fly. She's an amazing person. It makes your heart so happy.
In the summer of 1989, Kathleen Clark was busy climbing the corporate ladder as a stockbroker in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
I was just 22 and the world was my oyster, you know, wasn't looking really to get married or even be in a relationship or anything like that.
But all that changed when she met a handsome coworker named Bruce Steinman.
Bruce was very shy and quiet, just a polite, kind, easygoing person. One day he wrote me a note asking to go out to lunch. It was kind of cute that he had written a note. I was like, sure.
As the two chatted over lunch, Kathleen found herself intrigued by her date.
He just had an air about him that was different than other guys. It felt like he really wanted to woo me and impress me. We started doing everything together.
It was a whirlwind romance, and after 6 months of dating, Kathleen had no doubts when Bruce popped the question. Almost 2 years later, Kathleen and Bruce tied the knot on a gorgeous beach in Maine.
It was a beautiful day. I was very, very happy. All my friends were with me. It was an awesome, awesome day.
I could see how happy she was. They looked great together. It was just like a match made in heaven.
The happy couple settled down in a tiny New Hampshire town just 40 miles outside of Boston.
It was great. Bruce got a job that he liked in computer technology sales. I was thrilled with my new house. We had a really nice life.
5 years later, the two were overjoyed when they welcomed a son into the world.
We were very happy. Bruce was an awesome, awesome dad. He loved having a son, and he was very helpful.
They were always together. I definitely thought that they were the perfect American family.
Over the next 13 years, Kathleen kept the home fires burning, while Bruce's job in IT sales sent him on regular travel.
Bruce was gone more than he was home. But it was okay, it didn't bother me. You just get used to it. Our son and I were both very happy when Bruce would be coming home.
But by the spring of 2011, whenever Bruce was around, Kathleen found it harder and harder to keep his attention.
Bruce always liked his cell phone, but it became like almost an obsession. One night, we were at a friend's house for dinner, and the guys always go outside, and Bruce didn't even go out with them. He just stayed in the house, sitting on the couch, doing something on his phone. It became almost an embarrassment for me, to the point that I would say to him, "What are you doing on the phone?"
I'm just checking some work emails, but I just needed a few more minutes.
And after Bruce took on a new job, Kathleen noticed more bizarre behavior from her husband.
Bruce was still working with government sales, but he was going at least twice a month to the DC area. Right around that time, he started being very nitpicky with me over everything. One morning I came down and he had every cabinet, every drawer, everything wide open in the kitchen. And I knew that he didn't like that I didn't close the doors completely shut, but it was creepy to come down and see that he had done that. It was just odd behavior over insignificant things. And when I tried to talk to him about it, he would just pass it off. I'm under a lot of stress at work. So I'm like, maybe he is. I just didn't know what was going on with him. But I knew something was wrong.
And Kathleen would soon discover the sweet, affable man she married was really a cold-hearted snake.
There was something sinister going on.
He launched an attack. There was nothing that this man wouldn't do.
I was terrified. I knew my marriage was in trouble, but I never imagined that my son and I were in danger.
By the fall of 2011, Kathleen Steinman's happy 20-year marriage to her husband, Bruce, had taken a strange and disturbing turn.
I really had no idea what was causing the change. He was constantly on the phone. All of a sudden, it was like I couldn't do anything right. I couldn't say anything right. It just became very tense to be around him.
Kathleen told me that Bruce got very demanding. I just thought that they were going through a rough patch.
Soon, the tension between the Steinmans was unbearable.
When I would hear the car pull in, I could feel my stomach drop. I'm like, oh, he's home now. So I just stayed away because I knew he was going to try to find something to pick a fight with me about. Like, he'd walk in one door, I'd go out the other.
And Kathleen's friends noticed the change in Bruce, too.
I did have one friend who said maybe he's having an affair. But Bruce was very, quiet, not really an outgoing guy. I just never, ever imagined him ever having an affair.
But 2 days before Christmas, Kathleen had her first inkling that maybe her husband was hiding a secret.
I was down in the kitchen and his phone happened to be on the counter. And it buzzed and he had gotten a text and it just said, "Not sure if I'm going to be here."
Kathleen noticed the text was from a woman named Victoria.
It wasn't a name that I recognized. I just saw the text and thought, oh my God, is that a woman? Maybe he really is having an affair. What he had told me, it made me more suspicious.
But after the new year, her confidence was bolstered when the old Bruce seemed to be back.
Bruce had asked me to go out to dinner one night. He told me that he knew he hadn't been treating me right and things were gonna get better now. Something had changed. He seemed to be a little more back in tune with his family and family life again.
So on June 15th, 2012, when Bruce made plans to visit his mother in Massachusetts for the day, Kathleen trusted him completely.
Bruce had told me that he might be home late. I didn't sleep very well at all because I kept thinking he was coming in.
But the next morning, when she woke up alone, Kathleen realized Bruce hadn't come home at all.
I tried calling him, but I went right into voicemail, and that was it. So it was very surprising because you couldn't pry the phone out of his hand for anything. I wasn't actually worried that something had happened to him. I was just angry at that point because Bruce had never done that before in the marriage.
Before Kathleen could gather her thoughts, the phone rang.
Bruce's brother called, which when I saw the caller ID was odd. His brother rarely called the house.
And he had some shocking news for Kathleen.
His brother said that Bruce had been arrested. I was just completely baffled.
When Bruce's brother revealed the alarming charges against her husband, Kathleen knew her world would never be the same.
He was like two totally different people.
He just lost control.
I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done?
On June 16th, 2012, Kathleen Steinman was beside herself when her brother-in-law told her that her husband Bruce was sitting in an Arlington, Virginia jail cell.
I thought, oh my God, what could he possibly have done? Bruce's brother told me that one of the charges was stalking. And the other one was unlawful filming of a nude person. So I knew that it involved another woman. All I could keep thinking was that he was having an affair.
Kathleen barely had a moment to collect her thoughts before Bruce called on the other line.
The first thing he said was,
I'm in jail.
and I said, you fell in love with another woman? And he said, of course not. I was tricked and duped.
Of course not.
I said, what did you do to this woman? Why did you do this? And he just kept saying, she owed me money, she owed me money. And he said, I'm gonna need help. And then we got disconnected.
Kathleen was left with nothing but a dial tone and a million questions.
I was totally shocked. I had no idea what was happening.
Desperate to learn more about her husband's case, Kathleen went searching the internet and made a shocking connection.
I did see the woman's name connected to his name and recognized it.
The woman Bruce had been charged with stalking was Victoria, the stripper who had texted him.
And I clicked on her name, and that's when I found all these porn websites. I thought, oh my gosh, it wasn't just a woman that he knew or had been having an affair with, it was actually a prostitute. To actually see it and watch it, it was very traumatic.
I was shocked Bruce would be the last person in the world I would ever expect to do what he had done. I think Kathleen was blindsided.
The following week, Kathleen accepted Bruce's call from jail, but it wasn't quite what she expected.
He wanted money for bail. He said if you had been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened. He actually said, if you have an ounce of humanity, you'll help me. So he was just saying all the wrong things to me.
Listen to me, Kathleen.
After 21 years of marriage, Kathleen was done.
He was not the guy I thought I married. Nothing seemed to matter anymore except what he needed. I was angry. Anything he did to me, he's also doing to his son.
Kathleen told Bruce she wasn't bailing him out. She had something else in mind.
I told him I wanted a divorce, and he didn't like that.
I don't care what I've done. I don't care how I treated you.
He was almost belligerent. So it just made me angry that he was so selfish and so narcissistic.
But even behind bars, Bruce was able to use his allowed phone calls to wreak havoc on Kathleen's life.
The day after that phone call, my cell phone was shut off, and I just thought the bill was due and Bruce is in jail and he didn't pay it, so that's why the phone was shut off. But then I started getting bounced check notices. So I called the bank, and they said, oh, the money was transferred out.
Kathleen was shocked to discover that Bruce had removed almost all of their savings.
Bruce had called the bank. He left me $250. I was so angry and confused, but I thought he was in jail and I was safe.
Then on July 3rd, Kathleen's cable and Wi-Fi went out too.
I knew it was Bruce. He did that in one swift move. I was completely done with this man.
But the following month, Kathleen received an unexpected visit from the local police department.
They had come to the house because Bruce actually did make bail and was released from jail.
Kathleen had no idea how, but the officers confirmed that Bruce was back in town and told her a little detail about his stalking charges.
Bruce had sent his mistress a dead snake. That act in itself was a lethal act, so law enforcement was afraid that Bruce may come after Kathleen next.
They suggested that I go and get a protective order immediately. I was terrified at that point.
There was no telling where Bruce was, but Kathleen would discover everything her husband had done to his mistress and what he had in store for her.
This was personal. He did everything he could to hurt her.
Every night, I would barricade all the doors. I never thought he could be that vicious and vengeful.
In July of 2012, Kathleen Steinman was horrified when police informed her that her estranged husband, Bruce, had made bail and was back in the area while awaiting trial.
I was granted a temporary protective order, but I was terrified.
And it seemed not even a protective order could put an end to Bruce's vengeful behavior. 2 weeks later, Kathleen and her son came home to something strange.
Everything seemed fine. We were sort of settling in, and I went to get the laptop and my phone, and they were missing. I knew it was Bruce. It was scary knowing that Bruce had been in the house. I didn't know if he had been coming and going before. So I called the police.
Things were escalating. So law enforcement came and they actually swept the house, sweeping it for monitoring devices.
Vengeance. It turned out Victoria was not a prostitute at all.
The detective told me that Bruce created all those websites, making it look like she was a prostitute.
Bruce Steinman secretly filmed her and him having sex, then used these images on porn sites that he created, advertising her for sex.
Bruce included her employer's phone number, her boss's phone number, her home address.
A whole slew of people were coming to this woman's door seeking sex. She was very frightened.
That September, while Bruce was still awaiting trial, he set his sights on Kathleen.
Bruce started terrorizing me using the laptop he stole from me. He kept changing the password so that I couldn't access my own emails. He would listen to my voicemails and then delete them. I didn't know what he might do.
So Kathleen was thrilled when on November 9th, 2012, she learned from the Arlington Police Department that Bruce was arrested outside of Victoria's apartment.
One of the conditions for his release was he was to stay away from this woman. But he didn't want this. He was stalking her again. The police were staking out the apartment, and they caught him red-handed. He had on him a knife, which he had been using to slash her tires.
When I found out he was arrested again, I was like, thank God. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
In December 2012, Bruce Steinman pled guilty to attempted extortion, 2 counts of stalking, and felony identity theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail.
It's very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that someone I love would be capable of doing these things to anyone, let alone his own child and to me. There's no answer for it. There's no reason for it.
I think Kathleen is going to be cautious. But I think definitely she's made...
Sharp, metallic, like something slicing through the quiet surface of a winter night. And in that single sound, the town of Maple Hollow seemed to tremble. A place that had built its identity on routine rhythms, predictable mornings, the comfort of neighbors who never locked their doors, suddenly drowned beneath a shadow that refused to lift. It was the fall of 1997, cold air clinging to the pines, and the night had already been uneasy before anyone realized something was wrong. A girl had not come home, the kind of sentence that sounded simple, almost harmless, until the minutes stretched into hours, and the hours twisted into fear. A mother paced a hallway. A father stepped outside every few minutes to listen for footsteps that never came. And somewhere in Oregon's endless dark, whispers began to rise. Missing, disappearance, maybe even abduction. Words the town had never rehearsed how to say out loud. The girl's name was Emily Carter, 17 years old, bright-eyed, restless in the way small-town teenagers often were, a quiet dreamer with a habit of walking home alone after late study sessions. It wasn't unusual for her to take the long route, cutting through the narrow trail behind the high school, a path swallowed by trees and the smell of cold moss. But that night, the trail swallowed her instead. When dawn arrived, pale and hesitant, Maple Hollow awoke to the kind of silence that only comes when something has gone terribly wrong. Neighbors stepped onto porches, squinting into the chill, glancing toward the road as if expecting her to appear miraculously, brushing off concern with an embarrassed smile. She never did. Officers arrived quickly, because in a town this small, everyone knew everyone. And every missing person was not a case file, but a face they had waved to at the grocery store. They found her backpack first, lying near the trailhead, straps twisted as if it had been dropped mid-motion. Nothing inside was torn or damaged. Her notebooks remained neat, her pencil case zipped, her wallet untouched. It was the kind of detail that investigators murmured about in low voices. No theft, no signs of struggle, no reason she would throw it aside. A backpack abandoned without damage was a sentence with no ending, a puzzle missing its centerpiece. And from that moment, the words cold case began forming in the distance like a storm on the horizon, though no one dared say it yet. Search teams combed the woods with desperate precision, boots sinking into wet earth, flashlights cutting through morning fog. Dogs sniffed along the trail, circling, whining, pulling handlers into thickets but finding nothing. Helicopters thumped overhead, their blades stirring the treetops, but the forest answered with silence. Every hour widened the gap between her last known moment and reality. Every minute fed the panic spreading through town. Teachers canceled classes. Volunteers printed flyers. The diner stayed open all night, buzzing with nervous conversation. The sheriff held a trembling microphone in a makeshift press area and said they were exploring all possibilities. Every possibility except the one the town feared most, that Emily was gone without a trace. Questions multiplied faster than answers. A few students reported seeing her leave the library at 8:53 p.m., walking with purpose, head down, earbuds in, unaware of the world around her. A neighbor recalled hearing something around 9, a sharp rustle or maybe footsteps running, but she admitted later she might have been imagining it. A gas station attendant claimed he saw a dark pickup truck idling near the trail earlier that day, but he couldn't remember the plate, the model, or even whether it was real or a product of the power of suggestion once the story broke. Every lead dissolved in the light. Every clue turned to dust. The investigation shifted from hopeful to frantic, then from frantic to grim. Detectives mapped out Emily's relationships, her routines, her conflicts, the smallest details of her life. They talked to teachers, classmates, ex-friends, old crushes, distant relatives, but every path led nowhere. There were no threats, no strange phone calls, no secret complications, no double life. Emily had vanished cleanly, too cleanly, as if carved out of the world with surgical precision. Even the forest seemed offended by the absence of evidence. No straggle, no clothing, no footprints leading off the path. Only the backpack, abandoned like a question no one could answer. News vans eventually arrived, not because Maple Hollow was known for crime, but because the lack of answers had become a headline in itself. Oregon teen vanishes without trace. Trail disappearance stuns quiet town. Investigators baffled by missing student. Reporters set up floodlights that made the forest look theatrical, staged, like the opening scene of a horror film. Microphones pushed into faces. Cameras lingered on tear-streaked cheeks. The town felt exposed, dissected, naked under national attention. And through it all, Emily remained missing. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons turned, but the case did not. Leaves fell, snow arrived, spring thawed the ground, but nothing new emerged. The only constant was the ache, an ache visible in the way her mother kept her bedroom untouched, curtains half-drawn, bed still neatly made. Her father took to long drives at night, headlights carving through foggy roads, searching without knowing what he hoped to find. The trail where she disappeared became a place people avoided, not out of superstition but out of reverence, as if the ground itself held a memory too heavy to disturb. Detectives rotated in and out of the case, each one bringing new energy, new theories, new interrogations, but leaving with the same emptiness. Suspicion grazed a few individuals. A biology teacher who lived alone, a drifter seen passing through town, a local mechanic with a criminal record, but nothing stuck. Rumors blossomed like invasive vines. Some swore Emily must have run away. Others believed she had been abducted by someone she knew. And a few whispered darker theories, about the woods, about shadows, about things that hid beneath the surface of ordinary towns. Every whisper added another layer of dread. By year 3, the investigation had cooled. By year 5, it had hardened into something colder, heavier. A case that sat in storage with a label that no family wants to see. Cold case. A phrase that seemed to steal warmth from the room whenever spoken. The Carters attended every annual vigil, standing in candlelit circles with neighbors who tried to help but could not soften the hollowing truth. Emily's trail had ended before anyone knew it was a trail at all. Yet the mystery never faded. Even as headlines drifted on to newer tragedies, Maple Hollow remained anchored to 1997, living in the shadow of the girl who vanished in the silence between one breath and the next. Some nights, townsfolk reported seeing flashlights in the woods, volunteers who refused to give up, or perhaps the sheriff revisiting the trail one more time. But no matter how many times they searched, the earth kept its secrets. And beneath all that silence, all that unresolved grief, all that unanswered chaos, something else waited. A fragment, a trace, a microscopic truth buried in evidence no one had known how to read back in 1997. A truth so small it lived unnoticed inside a sealed evidence bag for 25 years, clinging to the fabric of a backpack strap like a whisper trapped in time. A truth that would erupt decades later, transforming a dead end into a revelation. A truth that would ignite headlines once more, sharper and more explosive than ever. Oregon 1997 cold case solved. DNA twist shocks investigators. But back then, in those early days when hope still lingered in the corners of every conversation, no one could have imagined that the key to the mystery had been found already, just not recognized. No one understood that science would evolve, technology would sharpen, and one day the case that haunted an entire community would reawaken with a force that shattered everything they thought they knew. For now, all they had was fear, whispers, and the thick weight of a story without an ending. An ending waiting patiently in a speck of genetic truth too small for the human eye to see. It began with a box, ordinary, dust-coated, unremarkable in every way except for the weight it carried. 2 decades after the disappearance, the evidence room felt like a cemetery of forgotten tragedies, each cardboard coffin holding a story that had slipped out of the public eye. Investigators rotated in silence between shelves stacked so tightly they seemed to press in on the air itself. It was routine, just another cataloging day, until Detective Rowan Hale paused, fingers resting on a worn label that had faded into a faint blur of ink. The year jumped out at him first, 1997. Then the name, Emily Carter. For reasons he couldn't explain, the moment felt like stepping into a cold draft, as if the room itself exhaled against the back of his neck. He pulled the box down carefully, setting it on a metal table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering slightly, an imperfect glow that made the room feel even older than it was. Rowan wasn't from Maple Hollow. He had joined the state task force only 6 months earlier, assigned to oversee cold cases that budget cuts and fading memory had pushed to the margins. But there was something about the Carter case, something in the way veteran officers spoke of it with lowered voices, something in the way the town's name lingered on their tongues, that made him open the box instead of passing it by like the dozens before it. Inside lay the remnants of a life interrupted. Photographs curled at the edges, police reports typed on yellowing paper, a timeline scribbled in red pen that stopped abruptly after her last known sighting. And beneath it all, wrapped in evidence tape, sat the backpack. After all these years, it felt like an artifact, fragile but stubborn, holding tight to secrets no one had been able to pry loose. Rowan lifted it gently. He noticed a faint stain on one strap, something that early investigators had dismissed as dirt or plant residue, something too inconspicuous to matter at the time. But science had changed, capabilities had sharpened, and something deep in Rowan's gut told him this stain might be more than a blemish. He made a note. He reopened the folder. He scanned through statements, theories, dead-end leads that seemed to coil around one another like tangled wires. The case had been built on absence, the absence of a body, the absence of evidence, the absence of clarity. But absence itself was a clue. Someone had gone to great lengths to vanish her without leaving a mark. That level of precision Rowan knew was rare, purposeful, the work of someone confident, methodical, unhurried, someone who believed the forest would protect them with its shadows. As he read, he felt the rhythms of the old investigation, the rising panic, the desperation of the search. He felt the weight of conversations documented in thin lines of ink, parents shaking voices, classmates trying to remember fleeting details, a sheriff clinging to hope long after it stopped being practical. The case was more than cold. It was frozen, locked beneath the ice of time, untouched since 2003 when the last review had yielded nothing new. But Rowan wasn't interested in the past narrative. He was interested in the spaces between the lines, the details that had been overlooked, the questions that had become invisible simply because no one dared ask them again. He closed the file and sat back, pressure building behind his ribcage, an instinct he had learned not to ignore. There was something here, something small, something vital. 2 days later, under the sterile buzz of the state forensic lab, the backpack strap lay under magnification. A technician leaned forward, adjusting the lens. "It's faint," she said, exhaling on the glass. "But it's organic, not soil, not plant matter. What kind? Rowan asked, his voice low, steady. Cellular, she answered. Then after a moment, human. The word dropped like a stone into a still lake, sending ripples through everything they thought they understood. Human. After 25 years, the backpack, the same object that had baffled investigators with its lack of damage, was now whispering what no one had been able to hear before. A trace, a fragment, the kind of microscopic truth that only modern DNA mapping could unearth. The technician ran preliminary tests. The results were incomplete, degraded, but there was enough to confirm that the sample did not belong to Emily. Enough to tell them someone else had touched that strap at the moment her life diverged from its path. Enough to reopen a case the world had silently accepted as unsolved. Rowan wasn't satisfied with partial answers. He ordered deep genomic enhancement, a process that could resurrect even the most deteriorated samples. It would take days, maybe weeks, but he knew waiting was part of the work. Patience was its own form of pressure. In the meantime, he revisited Maple Hollow. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still buzzed with the smell of coffee and fried batter. The same wooden benches sat outside the library. The trail near the high school remained narrow, overgrown in places, but unmistakably the same corridor Emily had walked that night. Standing there, Rowan felt the weight of the trees, tall and unmoving, as if they had recorded everything but refused to speak. He noted the angles of the path, the distance between light posts, the blind corners where shadows gathered like conspirators. He tried to picture her. 17, tired, headphones in, unaware of danger blooming behind her like a silent breath. He tried to picture the person who reached out, touched her backpack strap, and took her from this trail without leaving enough evidence to fill a single paragraph. Back at the station, he met with retired Sheriff Walter Granger, a man whose face carried the fatigue of unfinished business. Walter had spent the better part of a decade haunted by the case. When Rowan told him about the DNA discovery, the old sheriff closed his eyes, jaw tightening. So there was something there, Walter murmured. All these years, and we never knew. Rowan nodded. Technology wasn't ready, but now it might tell us what really happened. Walter leaned back, fingers steepled. There was someone early on, someone we looked at but couldn't pin anything on. A presence, you could say, hovering at the edges, but no evidence, no motive, nothing to justify pressing harder. Who? Rowan asked. A man named Alden Price, lived 3 blocks from the Carters. Quiet type, worked nights, no record, no complaints, but he had a habit of walking the same trail Emily used. And he moved away a month after she disappeared. Rowan made a note of the name, though he didn't react outwardly. Cold cases bred suspicion easily, but suspicion wasn't truth. He needed science, not speculation. When he returned to the lab, the enhanced DNA results were nearing completion. Machines hummed, lights blinked, algorithms churned through decades-old molecules. Each passing second felt heavy, like the ticking of a clock in a silent interrogation room. Finally, the technician looked up at him with eyes that revealed more than her words could. We got a usable profile, she said. And there's something else. Rowan braced himself. The DNA doesn't just identify a person, she continued. It reveals biological markers, genetic indicators, traits. And this one, it's unusual. How unusual? It suggests the person carrying this profile had a rare mutation, something only found in a handful of documented cases in the region. We cross-referenced every database. Less than 30 individuals matched the genetic signature. His heartbeat quickened. The investigation had just shifted from a search through a forest of unknowns to a narrowing tunnel leading toward a single name. And one more thing, the technician added, lowering her voice. The sample shows signs of trauma. Not to the person who left it, to the moment it was deposited. Stress markers, elevated compounds. Whoever touched that strap wasn't calm. They were in a state of intense physiological arousal. Fear, anger, panic. Something happened in that moment. A microscopic emotional fingerprint. A glimpse into the final second before Emily vanished. Rowan studied the printout lines, peaks, sequences that looked like abstract art but held the power to resurrect a 25-year-old truth. The case was no longer cold. It was simmering, glowing at the edges, cracking through the ice of time. Headlines seemed to echo in his mind, distant but coming closer, like thunder before a storm. Oregon 1997 cold case solved. DNA twist shocks investigators. But before he knew where the path would lead, before he understood the shape of the revelation waiting at the end, he felt the first tremor of dread. Because DNA does not lie. DNA does not distort. DNA does not care about reputations, friendships, or old assumptions. It only reveals. And what it was beginning to reveal would soon tear through Maple Hollow like lightning splitting an old tree in half. All Rowan could do now was follow the trail the past had left behind. A trail built not of footprints or witness statements, but of code. Genetic code whispering secrets no one had been ready to hear. The list arrived on Rowan's desk just after sunrise, printed on crisp paper that contrasted sharply with the weight of what it represented. 29 names. 29 individuals in the entire region whose DNA carried the rare mutation identified on the evidence sample. 29 possible shadows who might have brushed against Emily's backpack on the last night she was seen alive. The number felt both small and impossibly large, like standing at the mouth of a cave with countless tunnels branching into darkness. But he had to choose one to enter first. He spread the pages across the desk, studying each name, each address, each age. The profiles spanned decades, from teenagers to adults now well into their 40s. Some lived ordinary lives, teachers, mechanics, lumber workers. Others carried records of minor offenses, nothing violent but enough to stir the instinct of a seasoned investigator. Most had never passed through Maple Hollow. Most had no tangible link to Emily, except for one. Alden Price. The name sat on the page with an eerie calm, as if waiting for someone to finally notice it after 25 years. His address at the time placed him within walking distance of the trail. His age matched the estimated demographic markers on the DNA profile. But coincidences were not conclusions, and Rowan refused to let the gravity of the case pull him into assumptions. Evidence first, feelings later. He ran Alden's name again through updated databases, tracing his movements since 1997. After leaving Maple Hollow a month after the disappearance, he had drifted across Oregon, changing jobs frequently, never staying long in one place. No violent arrests, no red flags, just a pattern subtle but distinct of moving whenever attention grew uncomfortable. It was enough to make Rowan lean forward in his chair, pulse sharpening. A man who fled before questions found him was a man who feared the answers. But Rowan's instincts never fully rested. Something else gnawed at him, a detail he couldn't name yet. The DNA profile contained markers suggesting not just a genetic rarity but a medical condition associated with episodic inflammation. That condition often required medication, a specific medication, and a quick search through archived pharmaceutical logs revealed that, in the late 90s, only a small number of local clinics carried it. One of them was the Maple Hollow Community Health Center, the same clinic where Alden had once been treated for a work-related injury. Another point of intersection, another thread tugging him forward. Even so, he needed more context, behavior, history. He requested old employment files, scoured records from the mill where Alden had worked part-time, interviewed 2 former supervisors who remembered him only vaguely. Quiet guy, one said, kept to himself. Another added, strange sometimes, hard to read. None of it was incriminating, but none of it dispelled the growing shadow. Rowan drove to the address listed on Alden's most recent file, a secluded cabin near the foothills, surrounded by tall firs that swayed like silent witnesses. The gravel cracked beneath his tires as he pulled in. A chill threaded through the air, not just from cold weather, but from the sense of stepping into territory heavy with old secrets. Before he even knocked, he noticed the windows, covered from inside with thick curtains that swallowed daylight. A man answered the door, lean, gray at the temples, eyes narrow but alert. He looked older than his age suggested, as though life had sanded away at him one hardship at a time. Alden Price, Rowan asked. That's me, the man replied cautiously. I'm Detective Rowan Hale. I'm reviewing unresolved cases from the Maple Hollow area. Just routine updates. Alden nodded slowly, but something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or fear. He opened the door wider. You can come in. The cabin smelled faintly of old wood and antiseptic. Shelves lined the living room, filled with books arranged in perfect symmetry, spines aligned with meticulous care. Rowan noticed the emptiness of the space. No photographs, no personal decorations. A life lived quietly, deliberately erased of anything traceable. I heard they reopened some old files, Alden said, settling into a chair. Didn't think Maple Hollow still cared. Rowan watched him closely. Some cases never really close, he said. They just wait. Alden's eyes tightened, just slightly. The conversation moved politely at first: background, work history, his time in Maple Hollow. But as Rowan asked about the late 90s, a subtle tension crept into Alden's shoulders. He fidgeted with his sleeve. His breathing slowed in a controlled, almost rehearsed way. I remember that time, Alden said. Everyone was devastated. I didn't know her personally, but the whole town felt it. What made you leave? Rowan asked gently. Alden looked away. Needed a change. Too many memories in that place. Memories of what? He hesitated, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes darted toward the window, as if measuring the distance to escape. Just life. Noise. Gossip. You know how small towns are. Rowan did know, and he knew that people rarely uprooted their entire lives for noise. He scanned the room again. His gaze snagged on a small wooden table beside the couch. On it lay a bottle of medication, current, not expired, the exact medication associated with the genetic condition flagged in the DNA analysis. A coincidence? Possibly. But the timing, the location, the tiny tremor that crossed Alden's left hand when he noticed Rowan looking at it. All of it formed a constellation of suspicion that was becoming impossible to ignore. Still, Rowan left without confrontation. Not yet. Not until he had the final DNA match. He thanked Alden, stepped into the sharp forest air, and closed the cabin door behind him. As he reached his car, he thought he felt eyes on him from behind the curtains. Back at the lab, the match hit. A near-perfect alignment, enough to elevate Alden from person of interest to primary suspect. The mutation, the protein markers, the degradation patterns, they all pointed to him with the precision of a spotlight cutting through darkness. But the twist came a moment later, when the technician frowned at an additional data sheet. There's something else, she said. The DNA from the backpack doesn't just belong to one person. Rowan froze. How many? 2. His breath caught. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like gravity had shifted its axis. 2 sources meant 2 individuals touched the strap at the moment of the crime. 2 unknown presences at the trail. 2 threads intertwined in a mystery everyone thought belonged to one shadow. The second DNA profile was too degraded to identify completely, but the partial markers revealed enough to send a tremor through Rowan's chest. The signatures suggested a familial link, a close one. The second individual shared genetic traits with the first. Not identical, but unmistakably connected. Alden hadn't been alone. Rowan's mind raced. A sibling? Parent? A child? A cousin with similar markers? The possibilities rippled outward, colliding with everything he thought he understood. He returned to the files, searching for records that might reveal family ties, next of kin, anyone who might have shared blood with Alden. But the documents were thin. Alden had lived a solitary life. No listed relatives, no emergency contacts. That absence suddenly felt intentional. He dug deeper, accessing older census records, hospital logs, and archival data. And there, buried in a public birth registry from decades earlier, he found something that sharpened the air in his lungs. A line indicating that Alden Price had a younger brother, Evan Price, born 3 years after him. Evan Price, whose existence had disappeared from all modern records. No address, no employment history, no school transcripts past the 9th grade. It was as if his life had stopped being documented altogether. People don't vanish from paper without reason. And they don't vanish willingly. Rowan stared at the record, feeling the hair on his arms rise. If Evan had been at the trail that night, then the case was far more complex than a lone predator hiding in the woods. This was something coordinated, something familial, something bound by blood and secrecy. A duo. Two shadows. Two sets of hands reaching for Emily Carter. But why hadn't investigators found evidence of a second individual? Why had Alden never mentioned a brother? Why was Evan erased from every traceable database? As these questions churned, Rowan realized he had to return to the cabin. Something inside that house held the answers. Something Alden hadn't meant anyone to see. He grabbed his jacket, keys in hand, heart pounding with a rhythm that told him the story was accelerating whether he was ready or not. The forest loomed ahead, dark and dense, whispering warnings he didn't have time to decipher. The closer he drove, the heavier the sky seemed to press, as if Oregon itself understood the truth that was about to surface. The case was cracking open, not with a quiet revelation, but with a fracture that threatened to expose a truth buried deeper than anyone had imagined. A truth stitched together by DNA, silence, and the kind of darkness that doesn't fade over time. It festers. As Rowan turned onto the gravel road leading to Alden's cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer the only one following the trail. Someone else was moving in the dark. Someone who knew what happened in 1997. Someone who had been waiting 25 years for the past to stay buried. And someone who would do anything to keep it that way. The gravel crunched beneath Rowan's tires as he pulled up to Alden Price's cabin for the second time. But now the sound felt sharper, carrying a strange echo, as though the forest itself had been holding its breath since he left. The morning light filtered weakly through the firs, thin and brittle, unable to warm the mist hanging low across the yard. Everything looked exactly as before, silent, still, composed. Yet something in the air vibrated with unease. When he stepped out of the car, he noticed it immediately. The curtains no longer hung perfectly straight. One edge had been disturbed, pulled slightly aside, as if someone had watched him approach and then retreated too quickly to smooth it back into place. He knocked. No response. He waited. The forest whispered with shifting branches, but no footsteps came from inside. A second knock, louder, sharper, hit the wood. Still nothing. Rowan stepped back, scanning the cabin. The lock showed no signs of tampering. The yard held no fresh footprints, though the soil was compact enough that only deep impressions left evidence. The mailbox was empty. The silence was heavy, too heavy. He circled the cabin, trying to peer through cracks in the curtains. The angles revealed nothing. But behind the cabin, near the tree-line, he found something that tightened his chest. A set of tire marks, fresh enough to retain shape. Someone had left recently. Someone in a hurry. The tracks curved away into the forest access road. A path barely visible unless you knew where to look. A hidden exit. Rowan felt the first flicker of adrenaline burn through him. Alden had fled, or someone had taken him. Either way, the window for answers was narrowing fast. He returned to the front of the cabin, placing his hand on the doorknob. It turned slightly beneath his grip, suggesting it had been left unlocked, or forced shut hastily without engaging the latch. He hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the cabin was still organized, still meticulously arranged, but something was off. The symmetry was broken. A single chair sat angled away from the table. A book lay open mid-page. A glass of water had overturned, dried into a faint circle on the wooden surface. And the bottle of medication, once neatly standing upright, was gone. He stepped deeper inside, each footfall measured, absorbing every detail. A faint smell lingered in the air, sweat, metal, and something else, something nearly imperceptible but distinct enough to raise alarms. The lingering trace of rubber gloves. Fresh. Whoever had been here didn't leave long ago. He scanned the shelves, the kitchen counter, the hallway leading to a single bedroom. When he pushed the bedroom door open, the air inside felt colder, as though the window had been open earlier and only recently closed. A duffel bag sat on the bed, half unzipped. Inside were clothes, a flashlight, cash, and a folded map. Rowan's breath slowed. Someone had been preparing to run. But the contents were scattered, incomplete, as if the bag had been abandoned partway through packing. He noticed something on the floor near the edge of the bed. A scrap of paper, torn from a notebook. He crouched, lifting it gently. There was handwriting, jagged and hurried. He knows. Find Evan. Leave before. The sentence ended abruptly, cut off mid-stroke. The pen must have slipped or been yanked away. Rowan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Alden hadn't just fled. He had been interrupted. And the message, half warning, half confession, tore open a deeper layer of the mystery. Not only had Rowan's presence resurfaced the past, but someone else had been watching the ripples and decided to act. Evan. The name lurked like a shadow pressed against the edges of the truth. A brother who existed only in distant records, vanished before adulthood, absent from every database for 20 years. If Alden had been hiding him, protecting him, or fearing him, the implications were staggering. Rowan stepped into the small hallway closet, where coats hung neatly. But one hanger was empty, swaying slightly, as though the jacket had been taken moments before. Below it, the floorboard had scratches. Fresh ones. He knelt, pushing at the edge. The board lifted. Beneath it lay a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were 3 items. A pocketknife with dried residue in the hinge, a silver chain with no pendant, and a small wooden box. He opened the box. Inside was a photograph, 2 boys standing in a forest clearing. Alden and Evan. Both young, both smiling. Yet there was something chilling about the way their shoulders pressed together. Something rehearsed, like they knew the camera froze moments they wished to control. Evan's eyes were sharp, calculating even in childhood. Rowan felt a cold knot form in his chest. Whatever had happened in 1997, it had begun long before that night. A sudden vibration in his pocket made him stiffen. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. A voice, low and unsteady, whispered through the line. You shouldn't be there. Rowan froze. Who is this? Silence. Then, he's coming back. The call dropped. Rowan spun toward the window. The forest swayed innocently, but his instincts screamed. If someone had eyes on him, they could be anywhere among the trees. He stepped back from the window, moving quickly but silently, heart pounding with a fierce, controlled rhythm. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Hale. I need backup at... The radio hissed, then crackled into static. A deliberate jam. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. He wasn't dealing with an ordinary suspect. This was someone who had survived decades by staying unseen. Someone with enough foresight to anticipate law enforcement steps. Someone who understood the terrain and had no intention of letting the truth surface peacefully. Rowan scanned the cabin one more time, searching for anything that revealed where Alden or Evan might have gone. The map in the duffel bag caught his attention. He unfolded it on the table. Several locations had been circled, but one circled twice. An abandoned logging site 10 miles north. A place remote enough to hide. Remote enough to bury secrets. He folded the map, slipped it into his jacket, and stepped out of the cabin, locking the door behind him out of habit even though he knew it no longer mattered. As he walked toward his car, he noticed something new. A second set of tire marks crossing the first, leading in the opposite direction. A vehicle had arrived after Alden left. A vehicle that didn't belong to him. The pieces were aligning into a darker outline. Alden running, Evan watching, a silent call warning Rowan. And a second vehicle, someone else involved, someone orchestrating the movement behind the scenes. He drove toward the logging site, the road winding up through dense forest where the sunlight fractured into cold shards. The higher he climbed, the more the air thinned, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The road was narrow, barely maintained, the kind that swallowed sound and made every turn feel like an entry into another world. As he approached the old logging entrance, he spotted something near the gate. Fresh footprints in the mud, crossing each other, pacing, circling. One set belonged to boots larger than average, heavy soles. The other was lighter, faster steps, angled sharply as if the person had been in a hurry or panicked. He followed the tracks deeper into the clearing. Broken branches, drag marks, a piece of fabric snagged on thorns. He crouched, examining it. Dark blue, denim, torn abruptly. A sound cracked through the trees, distant, metallic, like metal hitting metal. Rowan straightened, pulse spiking. He moved forward cautiously, hand near his holster, senses sharpened. The clearing opened into a skeletal remains of a structure. An old mill shed, roof half collapsed, walls sagging with rot. The metallic sound echoed again from inside. He stepped closer, peering through a gap in the wood. A shadow moved. He inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. Inside the shed, a figure crouched beside an overturned table, rummaging urgently through a pile of old tools. The figure's movements were unsteady, frantic. When he turned enough for Rowan to see his face, the breath left Rowan's lungs. Alden Price, alive, exhausted, dirt streaked across his shirt, a gash across his brow. He was muttering something, his voice too faint to understand. Rowan stepped inside slowly. Alden. Alden whipped around, eyes wide with terror. Not fear of being caught, but fear of something else, something still approaching. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "He's not like me. You don't understand." Rowan took a step forward. "Where's Evan?" Alden shook his head wildly, backing away. "I tried to stop him. I tried for years. But he doesn't stop. He never stopped. You opened the door for him again. Tell me where he is." Alden lifted a trembling finger, pointing behind Rowan. Not at the door, not at the forest, but at something closer. Much closer. Rowan felt the air shift, presence behind him. A breath, a shadow stretching across the floor. He turned. A figure stood in the doorway, silent, still, eyes reflecting the dim light like polished glass. Evan Price. Not missing, not dead. Watching, waiting. And the expression on his face was not that of someone fleeing the past. It was of someone who had been waiting for decades for the past to catch up. Evan didn't speak at first. He only stared, his presence filling the doorway with a stillness so sharp it seemed to cut the air in half. Rowan felt the weight of those eyes, calm yet predatory, as if Evan were studying the angle of every breath he took. The shed seemed to shrink around them, the sagging walls bending inward, the beams absorbing the tension until the entire structure felt like a trap set decades ago and finally sprung. Alden pressed himself against the far wall, chest heaving. "Rowan," he whispered, voice cracked with defeat. "Don't turn your back on him again." But Rowan stood firm, feet planted, gaze locked on Evan. The younger Price brother, though older now, hardened by years lived off the grid, looked nothing like the faded records Rowan had pieced together. His hair hung long and uneven. His jaw carried a twitch just below the left ear, and tiny scars mapped across his skin like fragments of a story no one had ever heard. Yet his eyes were the most unsettling part. Steady, unblinking, almost empty. Not the emptiness of apathy, but the emptiness of someone who had outgrown fear long ago. Evan stepped inside with slow, deliberate movements. Not aggressive, not hesitant, simply inevitable. His boots crushed old leaves scattered across the shed floor, each crack echoing with a clarity that made Rowan's pulse pound. "Alden," Evan said finally, voice startlingly steady. "You weren't supposed to bring anyone here." Alden trembled. "I didn't. He found me. They found your DNA. They know everything now." For the first time, Evan's expression shifted. Slightly, a faint tightening near the eyes. Not everything. Rowan positioned himself subtly between the brothers, his instincts widening the gap, creating a triangulated space that allowed him room to react. "Evan," he said, voice controlled, "I need you to step away from your brother." Evan tilted his head, studying him the way a biologist might study a specimen. "You think he needs protection from me?" "I think you want something," Rowan replied, "and I won't let you take it." Evan's lips parted in something resembling the ghost of a smile. "You have no idea what I've taken." Alden flinched at the words, pressing a hand over his mouth as if trying to keep memories from spilling out. Rowan caught the movement, the fractured guilt, the decades of fear. Whatever the truth was, it bound these brothers together in a way that was neither loyalty nor hatred, something darker, more corrosive. Rowan steadied his breath. Evan, let's talk outside. Away from your brother. Away from this shed. Why? Evan asked. So you can put handcuffs on me? So you can break a story? A cold case headline. He stepped closer. You're too late. You're walking through the ashes of something you can't rebuild. Rowan sensed the shift before he saw it. Evan's body angling, weight distributing, knees bending slightly. Not an attack stance. Something more subtle. A readiness born from instinct. Alden, Evan said without turning. Tell him. Alden shook his head violently. No, I can't. I can't say it. Tell him what happened at the trail. Alden collapsed to his knees, tears streaking through dust on his face. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. Evan, please. Rowan stepped toward him, but Evan moved faster, positioning himself between them with a precision that wasn't practiced. It was innate. His arm extended slightly, not touching Rowan, but close enough to make the message clear. Don't interfere. It started with him, Evan said softly, eyes still locked onto Rowan. Everyone always thought I was the dangerous one, but he's the one who grabbed her first. Alden choked on a sob. I tried to help her. I tried to let her go. I froze. Evan, please stop. Rowan's heart slammed against his ribs. The narrative was fracturing, splitting, contradicting itself. And in that fracture lay the truth. Messy, horrific, intertwined with both voices. Evan, Rowan said, step back. Put your hands where I can see them. Evan ignored him. Do you know what fear does to people, detective? It doesn't make them violent. It makes them obedient. He leaned closer. You're trying to protect him because you think he's weak. But the weak ones are the most dangerous. Alden screamed, I didn't kill her. The words ricocheted off the wooden walls, dust shaking loose from the rafters. Evan stepped aside just enough for Rowan to see Alden's face, a landscape of guilt years in the making. Rowan kept his voice grounded. Alden, look at me. Did you touch Emily that night? Alden nodded, small, slow, broken. But I didn't hurt her. I swear. I didn't hurt her. Evan let out a soft exhale, almost amused. He grabbed her when she tripped, tried to pull her back to the trail. He panicked when she screamed. And that's when he called for me. No, Alden whispered. Evan, stop. That's not how it was. Rowan felt the truth pulsing in the space between them. Not whole, not yet, but close enough to sense its shape. Fear, mistake, cover-up, and something darker lurking beneath. You were both there, Rowan said quietly. Evan smiled, the gesture chilling enough to freeze marrow. Yes, but only one of us stayed in the darkness afterward. Alden's sob fractured. I thought she was alive. I thought you were helping her. Evan turned fully toward him, voice quieter now. I helped her stop screaming. Rowan felt nausea twist in his stomach. The way Evan spoke, void of remorse, void of empathy, sent cold dread spiraling down his spine. He moved his hand closer to his radio instinctively, though he knew it was still jammed. Evan, Rowan said, you need to step away from your brother. Now. But Evan's gaze had drifted to the side, to something outside the shed door. His expression sharpened. He followed you, Evan murmured. Rowan tensed. Who? Before Evan could answer, the forest erupted in the crackle of snapping branches. Heavy footsteps, fast, deliberate, a third presence. The air thickened with urgency. Rowan moved toward the door, but Evan blocked him with a swift step. You shouldn't go out there. I'm not asking your permission, Rowan snapped. Evan's eyes narrowed. Then you're walking into a trap. A shadow crossed the doorway. Rowan grabbed the handle of his holstered weapon but held his fire, his training overriding the instinct to react prematurely. The shadow stepped further into view. A man, middle-aged, weathered face, jacket mud-stained, eyes wide with something between desperation and rage. Rowan recognized him from case files, the former mill supervisor, Harold, Kentucky, one of the earliest interviewees in 1997. Someone who had always placed himself near the trail but lacked any evidence tying him to the event. "What are you doing here?" Rowan demanded. Harold's voice cracked like dried timber. "You shouldn't trust either of them." Evan laughed softly. "He arrives after 25 years and wants to play hero." Harold pointed a trembling finger at Evan. "I saw you that night. Both of you. You think I didn't? I was there. I heard her scream." Rowan's grip tightened on his weapon. "You told investigators you went home early. You never mentioned being near the trail." Harold shook his head violently. "I ran. I was scared. I didn't know what I saw. But when the news broke the next morning, I tried to tell the sheriff. He said he checked the area. He said I must have heard an animal. And then I convinced myself he was right." His voice dropped. "Until now." Evan stepped closer, his presence somehow expanding. "So you followed him," he said, nodding at Rowan. "Cowardice masquerading as courage." Harold's breath hitched. "I'm not letting you disappear again." "You're too late," Evan said. Something in his tone made Rowan's skin crawl. Evan moved, not fast, but with precise calculation, stepping sideways toward a rack of old tools leaning against the wall. His fingers brushed a rusted metal hook. Rowan drew his weapon. "Don't!" The shed spiraled into chaos. Alden scrambled backward, knocking over a crate. Harold lunged toward Evan, shouting incoherently. Evan swung the hook upward in one fluid motion, deflecting Harold's grab and sending him crashing into the wooden beams. Rowan advanced, weapon trained, but Evan moved with uncanny agility, circling behind a support pillar, using the shadows like an extension of his body. "Drop it," Rowan barked. But Evan wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Alden. "Alden," he said softly, almost tenderly, "you know how this ends." Alden sobbed. "Please don't make me. You already made your choice 25 years ago." Rowan stepped between them, blocking the line of sight. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. "Evan, drop the weapon and get on the ground." But Evan only tilted his head, observing Rowan with unsettling calm. "Detective, what makes you think the truth you're chasing is one you can survive?" Harold staggered to his feet, grabbing a piece of broken wood as a makeshift weapon. "You monster!" Evan turned sharply, and the world snapped open in a single violent motion. Something cracked. Someone screamed. A shadow surged, and Rowan realized, too late, that the cold case wasn't just a mystery resurfacing. It was waking up. The scream fractured the air like a fault line ripping open beneath their feet. Rowan spun toward the sound, heart slamming against his ribs, but the shed's dim light stretched the scene into a blur of movement. Harold lurching forward, Evan twisting with serpent-like precision, Alden curling into himself as if trying to disappear into the floor. Rowan raised his weapon, but in the chaos, the shadows of three bodies overlapped so violently he couldn't risk a shot. Evan moved first. He slipped past Harold's wild swing, fluid and silent, a shadow unfazed by panic. The rusted hook glinted for a split second as Evan deflected Harold's blow, twisting his arm behind his back with surgical control. Harold let out a guttural cry, stumbling, his makeshift wooden weapon splintering as it slammed against a support beam. Rowan surged forward. "Enough!" Evan's gaze snapped toward him. Not desperate, not enraged, but curious. Cold curiosity, the kind scientists reserved for observing reactions. Harold collapsed to one knee, clutching his shoulder, wheezing through clenched teeth. Evan stepped back into the darkness near the shed's rear wall, the hook hanging loosely from his hand, his expression unreadable. Alden sobbed behind Rowan, hands pressed against his face, fingers trembling uncontrollably. He rocked back and forth as if trying to shake loose a memory that had never stopped bleeding. Rowan pointed his weapon directly at Evan. "Drop it. Now." Evan tilted his head. His voice came soft, almost whisper-like. "Detective, do you really think bullets solve truth? Last warning, Rowan said, voice hardening. Weapon. Ground. Now. Evan didn't comply. Instead, he stepped deeper into the shadows, disappearing behind a wooden beam. Rowan adjusted his stance, anticipating an attack. But Evan didn't attack. He waited. The air thickened. The wind outside quieted. Even Alden's sobs diminished into trembling silence. Rowan felt something shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tightening, like the moment before a storm unleashes itself. Then Evan spoke again, this time directed at Alden. Tell him what you started. Alden shook his head violently. Stop. Just stop. Tell him, Evan repeated, or I will. Rowan didn't take his eyes off the shadowed silhouette. Alden, stay where you are. Alden's fingers dug into the dirt floor. He swallowed hard, breath stuttering. I tried to help her, he whispered. She fell. She panicked. I panicked. Evan stepped into a thin sliver of light. He grabbed her, he said calmly. Not to hurt her, at least at first. But fear is messy. Alden's voice cracked. I didn't mean for any of it. I didn't. Evan, please. You called for me, Evan said. You always left the hardest things to me. Rowan steadied his grip. Evan, one more step and I. Evan did not step. He froze. Not out of fear. Out of calculation. His eyes flickered toward the window, just for a fraction of a second, hardly noticeable unless you were watching carefully. Rowan was watching carefully. There, barely visible beyond the decayed wood and hanging cobwebs, was movement. Someone else was out there. Rowan's pulse quickened. He felt the shift before he fully understood it. Another presence closing in. Another variable entering the equation. The forest outside creaked under weight. A twig snapped. Rowan pivoted slightly, angling his stance to face both the doorway and Evan. Who's out there? Evan's lips curved into a faint, chilling smile. Someone who's been waiting longer than you realize. Before Rowan could react, a powerful beam of light burst through the shed doorway, blinding in the dim interior. A flashlight, military grade. Heavy boots followed, crunching across old leaves. A voice boomed. State your weapons. Everyone stay where they are. Rowan shielded his eyes, recognizing the silhouette instantly. Sheriff Wallace. But something about him was wrong. His uniform was out of regulation. His breathing was uneven. His weapon was drawn before any warning. And his eyes, once sharp and steady, now flickered with something feral. Alden whimpered when he saw him. Harold froze mid-breath. Evan didn't move at all. Rowan spoke through his teeth. Sheriff, lower the light. You're compromising the field. Wallace didn't lower it. He kept the beam fixed on Rowan, then swung it to Alden, then finally to Evan. His breath scraped out of him. Step away from each other, Wallace barked. Everyone. Rowan narrowed his eyes. Sheriff, how did you know we were here? Wallace didn't answer. Instead, his glare fixated on Evan. After all these years, he whispered, voice cracking, I finally found you. Evan's expression remained unchanged. You always knew where to look. No, Wallace said, shaking his head, trembling. I spent half my career chasing a ghost. And here you are, standing in front of me like nothing ever happened. Rowan felt a chill snake down his spine. Something ancient, unresolved, lived in Wallace's tone. Something deeper than duty. Something personal. Wallace, Rowan said carefully. Put the weapon down. Wallace's grip tightened. You shut up. You don't know what these boys did. You weren't here in '97. You didn't hear the screams. You didn't see the blood. Harold croaked. You told me it was an animal. You told me not to say a word. Because I saw him, Wallace shouted, pointing directly at Evan. I saw him dragging her. Evan spoke smoothly. You saw what I wanted you to see. Wallace's rage trembled, barely contained. You manipulated this entire town, and I let fear stop me from finishing what I should have that night. Rowan stepped forward deliberately. Sheriff, gun down. Now. Wallace snapped the gun toward Rowan. "Take one more step and I swear." Evan took that moment. He stepped between Rowan and Wallace. Not to attack, to distract. His voice dropped to a calm whisper that drifted across the shed like poison. "Sheriff, you didn't follow us because you were doing your job." Wallace's breath seized. "You followed us because you thought killing me would bury your mistake." "Shut up," Wallace muttered. "You blamed yourself for Emily," Evan continued. "But you were too afraid to admit what you really saw." "Enough," Wallace roared. "Do you want me to say it for you?" Evan asked softly. Something inside Wallace snapped. He fired. The shot tore through the shed with a deafening crack, splintering wood, ripping through shadows. Alden screamed. Harold ducked. Rowan lunged sideways, weapon raised, heart detonating inside his ribs. Evan didn't fall. The bullet struck the beam inches from his head, ricocheting into the roof. Rowan tackled Wallace before he could fire again, their bodies crashing into the dirt floor. The flashlight flew from Wallace's grip, rolling across the ground until its beam illuminated Alden's tear-streaked face. Wallace thrashed, years of pent-up rage flooding his limbs. "You don't understand. He killed her. He killed her. He killed." Rowan wrestled the gun from his hand and flung it aside. "Stand down. That's an order." Wallace bucked violently, spitting, snarling, a man consumed not by justice but obsession. When Rowan finally forced him onto his stomach and cuffed him, the sheriff collapsed into the dirt, sobbing with raw, gutted anguish. "I saw him," Wallace whispered, voice cracking open. "I saw him take her, but I couldn't move. I froze. And afterward everyone expected me to save the town. I wasn't brave enough." "You weren't alone," Evan murmured. Rowan turned sharply. Evan stood completely still, the rusted hook now dropped at his feet. His eyes glowed faintly in the flashlight's beam. "You think it was fear that stopped him?" Evan asked, glancing at Wallace. "No. It was survival." Rowan steadied his breath. "What are you talking about?" Evan stepped closer, not threatening but deliberate. Sheriff Wallace wasn't the only one who saw what happened that night. His gaze swept the room. Harold saw, Alden saw, and someone else was there too. A heavy silence fell. "Who?" Rowan asked. Evan stared at him with an expression so calm it made Rowan's skin crawl. "Emily." Alden broke apart, sobbing so violently his entire body shook. Harold's breath stuttered into silence. Even Wallace stopped crying. Rowan felt the words like ice settling around his heart. "What are you saying?" Evan's voice softened to something almost mournful. "She wasn't dead when I reached her." Alden screamed. Rowan's world shattered. But Evan wasn't finished. He stepped into the center of the shed, illuminated by flickering light, and said, "And you have no idea what she said before she took her last breath." Evan's words hung in the air like a suspended blade, gleaming with a truth no one wanted to touch. Even the forest outside seemed to recoil, wind pulling back from the shed as if bracing for whatever came next. Rowan felt every muscle in his body coil with tension, a tension that wasn't just anticipation, it was dread. Because the moment Evan said Emily had spoken, the entire trajectory of the case twisted into something far more volatile than guilt, panic, or cover-up. Alden's sobs cut jagged lines through the silence. Harold stared at Evan as though staring into the eyes of something not fully human. Sheriff Wallace, still pinned to the dirt beneath Rowan's knee, whispered a trembling, "No, no, that can't be," as if denial might rewrite the air. Rowan stood slowly, keeping his weapon trained on Evan. "What did she say?" His voice was steady, but inside him, something churned. A cold, creeping knowledge that this moment, the next sentence, could redefine 25 years of fear. Evan didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the collapsed roof beams above, as if reading something only he could see. When his eyes returned to Rowan, they weren't cruel or triumphant. They were hollow, ancient, like someone who had been carrying a burden for so long that confession felt like a form of decay. "When I reached her," Evan said softly, "she was still conscious. barely, fading. His voice almost cracked, the closest thing to emotion Rowan had seen from him. I thought she would scream again. I thought she would run. But she didn't. Alden let out a strangled cry and buried his face in his hands. Rowan's grip tightened. What did she say, Evan? Evan's jaw twitched. She said, "Don't let him leave." The words struck the shed like an earthquake, shaking loose dust from the rafters. Rowan felt them hit his bloodstream, cold and bright. Sheriff Wallace flinched. Harold stumbled backward as if physically struck. Alden collapsed sideways, as if his bones had liquefied beneath him. Rowan stared at Evan, heart pounding. Who was she talking about? Evan didn't blink. Alden. A gasp tore out of Alden's throat, raw and broken. No, I didn't. She misunderstood. I didn't. Evan spoke over him, voice calm as water. She grabbed my sleeve when she said it. She looked right at me. She used the last of her breath to warn me about him. Alden let out a howl of anguish so guttural it barely resembled a sound from a human being. He pounded the dirt with his fists, choking on sobs, shaking violently. She was scared. She didn't know. I didn't. Evan, please stop. Don't do this. Evan's eyes flickered with something Rowan couldn't decipher. Compassion, contempt, memory, whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced by a chilling composure. Rowan's voice lowered. Evan, you're telling me Emily believed Alden attacked her? Alden screamed. I tried to help her. Evan exhaled slowly. Fear distorts everything, detective. Alden panicked. Emily panicked. And panic feeds on itself. Rowan stepped closer. That doesn't answer the question. Evan's gaze hardened. She wanted to make sure he didn't leave before someone came. She wanted the truth to stay where it happened. But you didn't wait, Rowan said. No, Evan replied, voice flat. I didn't. Rowan felt the weight of 25 years shift again. The pieces rearranged themselves into new shapes, none of them whole, all of them horrifying. Harold swallowed thickly, stepping forward. So you killed her to protect your brother? Evan didn't turn. No. I stayed because she asked me not to let him leave. I stayed because she was dying. I stayed because she needed someone to hear her final words. Then what? Rowan asked quietly. Evan looked at Alden, who was crumpled on the floor like a man whose soul had been fractured beyond repair. He ran, Evan said. She reached for him. He ran anyway. Alden sobbed harder, rocking, clutching his stomach as if trying to hold himself together. Rowan felt the edges of truth sharpen. So you chased him? No, Evan said. He disappeared into the trees, slipped away, left her, left me. The ache in Evan's voice, subtle but unmistakable, slithered under Rowan's skin. He couldn't yet tell if it was grief or something darker. What happened after she died? Rowan pressed. Evan's eyes dimmed. I carried her deeper into the woods. Harold's voice broke. You hid the body. Yes, Evan said simply. Alden wasn't strong enough to face what he caused. Sheriff Wallace wasn't brave enough to report what he saw. And the town wasn't ready to believe the truth. Rowan's breath hitched. Wallace thrashed weakly against the cuffs. I didn't know what I was seeing. I thought. You saw her body on my shoulder, Evan said. But you didn't see the fear in her eyes when she looked at your deputy, did you? Wallace's writhing stopped instantly. He froze, completely. Rowan snapped his head toward him. What deputy? The sheriff's mouth moved soundlessly. Evan took a slow step forward. You want the truth, detective? There were 4 people on that trail that night. The shed went silent. Even the wind surrendered. Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. Who was the 4th? Evan lifted his chin, eyes locking onto Rowan with piercing intensity. You! Rowan felt the ground vanish beneath him. For a full second the world froze, an impossible stillness where even his heartbeat refused to continue. Then reality snapped back like a violent whip. That's impossible, Rowan said, the words sharp, immediate. I wasn't. I couldn't, I was a child. I lived 200 miles away. That's... Evan cut him off. You don't understand. Not literally you. His gaze sharpened. Someone like you. Someone trained like you. Someone who moved through shadows, unseen. Rowan steadied his breathing. Who was the fourth person? Evan's voice became a low, steady current. A man in uniform. Harold gasped. Alden pressed his face into the dirt. Wallace whimpered. A man, Evan continued, who arrived before you think. Rowan felt his throat tighten. Sheriff Wallace? Wallace shook violently. No, no. I didn't. Evan, stop. Not him, Evan said. Wallace froze. His deputy, Evan finished. Rowan's blood ran cold. Evan stepped further into the light. The deputy followed Emily for weeks. She told him to stop. She told him to leave her alone. But people in positions of power don't always listen, do they? He followed her that night. He watched her fall. He saw Alden. He saw me. And then he ran. Rowan's voice came out hoarse. What was his name? Deputy Lennox, Evan said. Harold whispered. Lennox died in 2004 car accident swerved off a bridge.
No accident, Avan Raplia.
Wallace made a choking noise. You killed him. Evan's eyes flickered. No, I told him the truth. And he killed himself. Alden's sobbing quieted into trembling silence. Rowan's pulse thundered. Why didn't you come forward? Why hide for 25 years? Evan's expression hardened, the calm veneer slipping to reveal something brutal beneath. Because the truth doesn't save people, detective. The truth destroys them. He looked at Alden. At first, I thought I could protect him by burying what happened. But you can't bury fear. It grows. Alden whispered. I wanted to tell someone, I wanted to confess every year. I thought about it. Evan lowered his gaze. And every year, I kept him alive by stopping him. Rowan stiffened. Stopping him from what? Evan looked up slowly. His eyes filled with a chilling resignation. From confessing, he said. From killing himself afterward. From ending everything. Alden covered his ears. Stop. 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 Rowan stared, stunned. You controlled him. No, Evan said. I protected him. The way she asked me to. Rowan's voice tightened. Emily asked you to protect the person who caused her death? Evan's eyes dimmed with that strange, unreadable sadness again. She didn't say protect him, Evan murmured. She said don't let him leave. The distinction cut through Rowan like a blade. But you interpreted it, Rowan said. I obeyed it, Evan replied. Rowan's heart pounded so hard it echoed in his ears. And that, Evan said softly, is why everything you think you know about that night is wrong. Rowan stepped closer. Then tell me what's right. Evan slowly spread his hands, as if offering the truth itself. But before he could speak, the shed door slammed open again. A fourth presence entered. And for the first time since Rowan met him, Evan Price looked afraid. The door slammed against the rotting wood with a force that vibrated through the entire shed, rattling old nails loose and sending a sheet of dust spiraling from the ceiling beams. Rowan instinctively swung his weapon toward the sound, feet shifting, breath catching midair. Alden froze. Harold staggered backward. Even Sheriff Wallace, face streaked with mud and tears, stopped struggling against his restraints. But it was Evan, unshakable, unreadable Evan, whose reaction changed everything. For the first time since Rowan had laid eyes on him, Evan's composure cracked. His eyes widened, jaw tensing, shoulders lifting almost imperceptibly, as if bracing for an impact no one else could see. Fear, real fear, crept across his features like a shadow slipping under a locked door. A figure stepped inside. Not wild, not frantic, not stumbling or breathless. Calm, controlled. A silhouette framed in the doorway, standing against the pale light of the forest beyond. The unknown figure took one step forward, then another, until the details sharpened. Work boots, forest-soaked jeans, a heavy jacket zipped to the throat, and hands gloved in dark leather. When the stranger lifted his head, Rowan saw eyes that reflected the dim light with unsettling precision. They were the same eyes as Evan's, but older, harder, a colder version carved into a different face. A face Rowan had never seen before, a face Evan clearly had. Evan whispered something under his breath, just one word, barely audible. Father. The shed seemed to tilt. The forest outside fell silent, as though nature itself stepped back from this revelation. Rowan felt adrenaline spike through him, sharp enough to sting the back of his throat. Their father, the missing piece, the ghost in every unasked question, the shadow behind the second DNA, the man no one had known existed. Alden's breath hitched. No, that's not possible. Harold stumbled to the far wall, eyes wide with animal-like disbelief. You're dead. You were supposed to be dead. Sheriff Wallace's voice dropped to a desperate rasp. We never found any record, no, how? The man stepped fully into the shed, and when he spoke, his voice was low and steady, a sound that seemed to move through the room rather than across it. Evan, the man said, I told you to leave this place alone. Evan didn't blink. It wasn't my choice. You brought them here, the man said. You made it their business. Rowan tightened his grip on his weapon. Sir, stop right there. Hands where I can see them. The man didn't move his hands, nor did he acknowledge the gun aimed at him. He looked at Rowan the way someone might look at a puzzle piece incorrectly placed on a board. You're out of your depth, detective. Rowan kept his stance firm. Identify yourself. Now. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to Evan. Not threatening, not affectionate, simply inevitable, like gravity. Father, Evan said again, almost pleading this time. It's not like before. Things changed. The man's jaw tightened. Nothing has changed. You just lost control. Rowan spoke, voice hardening. One more step and I will shoot. The man glanced at Rowan with the faintest hint of amusement. If you were going to shoot me, detective, you would have done it already. Something in the way he said it, not arrogance, not threat, but absolute certainty, sent a chill down Rowan's spine. Alden crawled backward, desperate to get as far from the man as possible. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be alive. The man turned toward him. And you shouldn't be talking. Alden whimpered, shaking violently. Please don't. Rowan stepped between them, weapon raised. If you come any closer, I swear. Evan suddenly moved. Not toward Rowan. Not toward Alden. Toward the man. He placed himself between his father and everyone else. Stop, please. For a brief moment, father and son stared at each other, an unspoken war crackling between their gazes. Then the man shifted his attention to Rowan again. You've been digging, the man said, turning over stones that were meant to stay buried. Rowan's voice stayed low but unbroken. Emily Carter deserves truth. Truth? The man almost smiled. There is no truth, only versions of it. No, Rowan said. There's what happened, and there's what you all hid. The man's eyes sharpened. You think you understand what happened that night? I'm getting close. That's your problem, the man said. You think proximity equals understanding. Rowan felt anger pulse in his chest, hot and electric. Then teach me. No, the man said, because once you learn what Emily knew, you'll wish this case had stayed cold. Evan swallowed hard. Father, please. Be quiet, the man said without looking at him. The command landed like a physical blow. Evan's shoulders curled inward. Sheriff Wallace wheezed from the floor. He was there that night he said he saw. Rowan spun. Sheriff, what are you talking about? Wallace's eyes were glassy, wild. I saw him, in the trees, watching. Rowan turned back toward the man. You were there. The man didn't deny it. He didn't nod either. He simply existed in the truth without needing to clarify it. Rowan pressed on. Why was your DNA on the backpack? But it was Evan who answered. Because she grabbed him too. Alden's breath collapsed into a sob. No, She never touched him, she touched all of us, Evan murmured. The man spoke with chilling calm. Because all of us were there. The shed froze. Even the wind seemed to stop outside, as though waiting for the next sentence. Rowan inhaled slowly, his voice a ragged edge. All of you were present when Emily died. The man nodded once. A single, devastating confirmation. Rowan felt the world tilt. The truth wasn't a puzzle, it was a trapdoor. A long, horrible silence swallowed the shed. Finally, the man took another step forward. And Rowan saw something. Not anger, not guilt, but resolve. The kind of resolve that comes from decades of decisions made in darkness. You want the story, detective? The man asked. Fine, I'll give it to you. Alden whimpered, shaking his head violently. No, please, don't. He doesn't need to know. Evan's eyes glistened. He deserves to know. After everything. No, Alden cried. Not like this. It has to be like this, Evan said, voice breaking. Their father exhaled once, the sound cold and final. Emily wasn't the first, he said. The words exploded through the shed like a bomb. Harold staggered backward, face draining of color. Wallace moaned, curling deeper into himself. Rowan froze, mind racing. But the man continued before anyone could react. And she wasn't supposed to be the last. Rowan's chest tightened. What do you mean? The man's gaze locked onto him, steely and merciless. It wasn't an accident, he said. Not for any of them. Alden screamed. Stop! Please, stop! But the man didn't stop. Everything that happened that night, he said, was part of something bigger. Evan closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. Rowan's pulse pounded. Bigger how? The man stepped closer to him. So close Rowan could see the faint scars etched across his jawline. You think this is about a girl who disappeared? He said, voice low. It isn't. What is it about? Rowan whispered. The man leaned in. It's about the ones who were taken before her. Rowan felt a chill crawl up his spine. And the ones taken after. Evan whispered, Father, don't. But the man continued. Emily found something she shouldn't have. She saw something she wasn't meant to see. And when she ran, he looked at Alden. You weren't the only one who chased her. Alden broke into hysterical sobbing. Rowan's world became two things. Evan's trembling breath and the father's cold, relentless voice. Evan whispered, He's telling you the part we never could. Because you lied? Rowan asked. No, Evan said. Because the truth isn't about guilt. It's about design. Then the father spoke again. The words were soft, but they shattered the air. Detective, you've been asking the wrong question this entire time. Rowan steadied himself. Then what's the right question? The man's smile was thin and hollow. Why do you think Emily was on that trail to begin with? Rowan's heart stopped, because he suddenly understood. He had no idea what this case truly was. The question hit Rowan like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath out of him not with force, but with implication. Why was Emily on that trail to begin with? The father's voice echoed inside him, cold and precise, slicing through every assumption he had built around the case. All this time, Rowan had been working backward from the moment she disappeared, never once considering that the path to the truth began before she stepped onto the trail. Alden curled into himself, shaking violently. Evan stayed motionless, eyes fixed on a point only he could see. Harold clutched the wall to steady himself, face pale with dawning horror. Sheriff Wallace stared into the dirt, as though the answer had been buried there for 25 years. Rowan forced himself to breathe. What do you mean? He asked. The father folded his arms, his presence absorbing the dim light like a void. Emily didn't walk onto that trail by accident. She went there because she was looking for something. Looking for what? Rowan demanded. The man shook his head slowly, pityingly. Not something, detective. He leaned forward. Someone. The shed fell silent again. But the silence wasn't empty. It was trembling, waiting, ready to crack. Rowan stepped closer. Who was she looking for? You already know, the man said softly. You just haven't allowed yourself to see it. Rowan's pulse hammered in his neck. Spell it out. The father's gaze sharpened, cold as a scalpel. She was looking for the person who had been following her for weeks. Harold uttered a tortured whisper. No, no. Alden shut his eyes, tears leaking out. Evan stared at Rowan, unblinking. Rowan swallowed hard. Deputy Lennox. The father smiled, thin, chilling. Very good. Rowan's stomach dropped. So she wasn't coming home that night. She was going to confront him. Not confront, the man corrected. Escape. Rowan frowned. Escape. She knew he was waiting for her outside the library, so she changed her route, took the trail instead. Quieter. Hidden. Hidden from Lennox, Rowan murmured. The father nodded. But she wasn't the only one on that trail. Alden let out a low moan and covered his ears again. Rowan pressed, voice tightening. Why were you there? The father didn't flinch. Because Evan told me the girl was being watched. And Evan, he placed a hand on his son's shoulder, has always been my eyes. Evan looked away, shame and defiance warring on his face. Rowan's stomach twisted. So you were tracking Lennox? Yes, the father said. Because Lennox was following her. And because Lennox had already taken others. Rowan felt the world lurch sideways. Others? He repeated. The father didn't blink. 5, detective. Harold choked on air. God. Sheriff Wallace gagged, coughing violently until mud streaked down his chin. We never knew. You never asked, the father said. Rowan shook his head, trying to steady himself. There were no reports, no missing persons, no bodies, the father corrected. No evidence, no connections. Lennox was smart, careful. He preyed on the forgotten, the invisible. What about Emily? Rowan asked. She wasn't supposed to be visible either, the father said. But she was brighter than he anticipated. She sensed him. She avoided him. She noticed details. She wrote things down. Wrote what? A journal, Evan said quietly. She hid it, but Lennox found it. Alden sobbed again. Stop, please stop. Rowan's voice turned to steel. Where is the journal now? Evan shook his head. Gone. Burned. Lennox destroyed it the night before she died. But not before she told someone, the father added. Rowan inhaled sharply. Who? Evan answered with a whisper. Me. A shock ran through Rowan. She told you? She thought I was following her too, Evan said, voice trembling. She confronted me behind the school, asked me why I kept watching her. I told her the truth, that I wasn't watching her. I was watching him. Lennox, Rowan murmured. Evan nodded. And she believed me. She asked for my help. Rowan forced himself to stay focused. So that night, she took the trail because she was trying to avoid Lennox. She thought she could slip past him, the father said. But fear doesn't follow logic. Rowan's chest tightened. What happened next? What did she see? All 3 Price men reacted. Evan stiffened. Alden broke down harder, and the father's eyes darkened with old shadows. She saw Lennox waiting, the father said, near the trail's bend. She tried to run. She didn't see Alden step out from the trees. I didn't mean to scare her, Alden cried. I never meant to. And I was following Alden, Evan said quietly, because he never followed instructions. Rowan felt his mind assembling the pieces at breakneck speed. Fear, confusion, multiple shadows converging, Emily running blindly, a fall, a scream, and then, and Lennox, Rowan asked. The father exhaled slowly, like a man revisiting a nightmare. Lennox heard the scream. He thought Emily was calling for him. He came out of the dark. Harold shuddered. I saw shapes, but I didn't. You saw for people, the father said. You just didn't understand which one she feared. Rowan's voice was barely audible. So Emily ran from Lennox straight into Alden. Alden broke, completely, his body folded, shaking uncontrollably. I tried to help her. I tried to pull her up. I tried. She scratched me. She thought I was one of them. She thought... She fought you? Evan said softly, not accusing, not condemning, just acknowledging. Alden pressed his face into the floor. I'm so sorry. Rowan felt grief and horror tightening around his lungs. So she was injured in the fall? Yes, Evan said. Her leg was bleeding. She was disoriented. She couldn't tell who was who anymore. And you? Rowan asked the father. I arrived last, the man said. At the worst moment. Rowan felt dread creeping up his spine. What did you see? The father's gaze became distant, remembering something he wished he couldn't. I saw Lennox reaching for her, saying her name like a prayer, saying she shouldn't have run. Harold whispered, Dear God! Alden cried harder. Rowan swallowed. And what did she do? The father closed his eyes. She crawled toward Evan. She chose him. Rowan felt the weight of those words. Chose him. Not Alden. Not Lennox. Not the father. Evan. She looked right at him, the father said, and said the words you now know. Don't let him leave. But which him? Which version of the truth had been shaped by trauma and fear? Rowan forced the question out. Who did she mean? Alden sobbed harder. Not me. Not me. But the father didn't hesitate. She meant Lennox. Alden froze. Even Evan's deadened expression cracked. Rowan felt the impact deep in his chest. She was telling you to stop Lennox from escaping. She knew what he was, the father said. She'd pieced it together from the journal. She tried to warn people. No one listened. But you did, Rowan said to Evan. Evan nodded. I tried to keep Alden away from her, but Lennox arrived first. Rowan's voice cracked. So how did she die? The father's answer came like a quiet blade. She didn't die because of a fall, or because of Alden, or because of us. He took one step closer. She died running from a predator who had taken many before her. Rowan's blood ran cold. Lennox. And he would have taken more, the father said. So I made sure he didn't. Rowan felt nausea flood his chest. You killed him. The father didn't blink. I ended what no one else would face. Harold swayed. Wallace sobbed. Evan lowered his gaze. Rowan whispered, Why didn't you come forward? The father's eyes hardened. Because the town wanted a mystery, and mysteries keep the guilty safe. But Emily's family, would you rather they believed she was hunted? The father said, or that she vanished without pain? Rowan had no answer. And besides, the father added, it didn't end with Lennox. Rowan looked up sharply. What are you talking about? The father stared into the dark woods behind the shed. Lennox wasn't acting alone. The shed fell into a suffocating silence. Evan whispered, Father, don't. But the father continued. He was part of something larger, something he never understood, something that didn't end with his death. Rowan stepped closer, breath shallow. What are you saying? The father finally turned back toward him. You've been following the wrong predator. Shock shot through Rowan like lightning. Then the father whispered, the one who gave Lennox his orders is still alive. And in the next instant, the forest outside snapped with the sound of a gun being cocked. Right behind Rowan. The click of the gun behind Rowan's head sliced the air so sharply that it felt like the entire shed inhaled in one violent gasp. He froze, every muscle locked. The cold metal of the barrel touched the back of his neck with the precision of a fingertip dipped in ice. Alden stopped crying mid-sob. Harold's breath hitched. Sheriff Wallace choked on a strangled sound, rolling instinctively onto his side. But Rowan didn't turn. Because the father's expression told him everything he needed to know. The father wasn't surprised. He wasn't startled. He wasn't afraid. He simply closed his eyes, like someone who had finally reached the end of a long, inevitable circle. Don't move, a voice whispered behind Rowan. A voice he recognized. Deputy Lennox was dead. The father stood in front of him. Evan was frozen. Alden was collapsing. So there was only one possibility. Sheriff Wallace's deputy. Wallace's new deputy. Deputy Carter. Emily Carter's older brother. Rowan's pulse detonated in his ears. "Jake," he whispered. "Put the gun down." Jake Carter pressed the barrel harder against Rowan's skin. "Step away from my sister's case." Rowan swallowed. "We're past that. We're deep into something else." "No," Jake said, voice trembling with fury and something darker. "There's only one truth, and it's the one I've spent my entire life digging for." Evan took a small step forward. "Jake, don't do this." "Shut up," Jake snarled. The father shifted slightly, placing himself closer to Evan, like he expected the next explosion before anyone else did. Jake's breathing was ragged now. A sound of grief sharpened into rage. "For 25 years, he said, I've lived with the belief that my sister died alone, that no one heard her scream, that no one came for her." His voice broke. "Then I find out you were all there." Alden sobbed. Harold trembled. Rowan remained perfectly still. Jake spat the last word. "All." Evan's voice was the first to break the silence. "Jake, your sister wasn't alone. You don't get to say her name." Jake roared, jamming the gun harder into Rowan's neck. Rowan felt the tremor in Jake's hand. Rage, yes, but something else too. Desperation. The kind that makes people dangerous. "Jake," Rowan said softly, "you came here for the truth. Let him finish telling it." "The truth," Jake barked. "You think any of them know truth? Jake gestured toward the father, "is a murderer. He killed Lennox. He buried the evidence. He made sure nothing ever surfaced." "That's not why I killed Lennox," the father said calmly. "Shut up," Jake roared. Evan stepped forward again. "He killed Lennox to stop him." Jake's grip tightened. "Stop him from what? Tell me. Somebody tell me what he was doing with my sister." Rowan felt the cold shock of the twist returning, rotating deeper, darker. The father inhaled. Lennox was taking orders. Jake stiffened behind Rowan. "Orders from who?" The father's eyes shifted toward Jake for the first time. "The same person you've been looking for all your life." Jake didn't speak. The air didn't move. Even the forest outside went still. Rowan felt something heavy forming in the space behind him. Jake's breath changing, his grip unsteady, throat constricting. He lowered his gun a fraction of an inch, just enough to signal confusion more than threat. "Say it," Jake whispered, voice cracking. "Say the name." The father looked at him with a gaze too old, too tired, too loaded with inevitability. "I can't say the name," he said, "because it was never written down, never spoken, never recorded." Jake trembled. "Then how do you know?" The father took a step forward, not threatening, but weighted with truth. "Because I followed the trail long before Emily did." Jake's lips parted. "What trail?" "The girls," the father said simply. Evan lowered his eyes. "The ones who vanished," the father continued. "The ones the town forgot. The ones no one looked for. The ones Lennox was ordered to take." Jake's breath rattled. "There were no missing girls." "Not from this town," the father said. "From the counties around it. From the highways. From the farms. They disappeared into the cracks. They were never part of the same jurisdiction. No one connected them." Rowan whispered. "You did." The father nodded. "Because I lost someone too." The room shifted. Jake froze. Evan closed his eyes. Alden looked up through tears. Harold muttered a trembling, "Oh God!" The father turned fully toward Jake. "My daughter," he said. Jake stared at him, stunned. "What?" "She vanished before your sister ever stepped onto that trail," the father said. "Taken by the same man who would later use Lennox as his eyes." Jake's voice thinned into a whisper. "You had a daughter?" The father nodded. "What happened to her?" Jake whispered. "Exactly what happened to Emily." Jake stumbled backward, devastated. No, he said. No, that's not. She was taken, the father repeated. And nobody looked for her. Nobody cared. Nobody even wrote her name down. Rowan felt something burning inside his chest. Something between horror and mourning. Jake's voice shattered. So you killed Lennox, because Lennox was delivering girls to someone else. The father finished, calm and merciless. Jake's gun lowered another inch. What someone? Rowan pressed. That, the father said, is what Emily found out. Jake stiffened. She knew. The father nodded slowly. She pieced together the pattern. She recognized faces. She saw Lennox following her. She knew she was next. And she knew if she didn't stop him, she'd be taken the same way they were. Jake's voice tore open. Then why did she die? Why didn't you save her? Why didn't? Evan stepped forward, breaking his silence with a voice that trembled for the first time. Because she wasn't running toward us, he said. She was running toward the person she thought could save her. Jake blinked. Who? Evan's voice cracked. You. Jake reeled backward as though struck by lightning. That's not possible. I wasn't there. I wasn't even in town that night. Rowan's eyes widened as the father inhaled deeply. Yes, you were, he said. Jake's face drained of blood. You came back early, the father continued. She saw you near the library. She tried to follow you. She thought if she reached you, Lennox would back off. Jake shook violently. No, I didn't see her. You didn't see her because you left, Evan said gently. You left before she reached you. Jake staggered. The gun wavered dangerously in his hand. Rowan slowly raised his hands. Jake, listen to me. None of this makes you guilty. Jake stared at him, eyes wild. She died because she couldn't reach me. No, Evan said sharply. She died because Lennox reached her first. Jake's breathing turned quick, shallow, panicked. Then the father spoke again, and his voice was the heaviest it had ever been. But she didn't just learn who was taking the girls. Jake looked up, trembling. The father paused. She learned why. Alden whimpered. Harold held his breath. Rowan felt the world tilt sharply, as though the truth itself were leaning over a precipice. Jake whispered, Why? The father looked directly at him. For a trade, he said. The words seemed to tear the room in half. Rowan's stomach clenched. A trade with who? The father locked eyes with him. With the man who promised protection in exchange for the girls nobody wanted. Jake's voice broke. What man? The father's voice was quiet. The one Emily tried to expose. Rowan stepped closer. Who? The father answered with a name that hit the room like thunder. The mayor. Jake's gun fell from his hand. And before Rowan could react, the forest outside erupted with the sound of approaching footsteps. Not one set. Many. The footsteps multiplied like a rising heartbeat. Fast, heavy, disciplined. Not the chaotic scrambling of frightened townspeople or hikers stumbling into danger, but something organized, precise. Rowan felt the floorboards tremble beneath his boots. Someone had sent men into these woods, and they were getting closer. The father turned toward the doorway first, his expression unaltered, almost resigned. Evan stiffened beside him. Alden clung to a support beam, trembling. Harold pressed himself against the wall as though trying to merge with it. Sheriff Wallace stared blankly at the ground, muttering incoherent fragments of guilt and disbelief. Jake Carter stood frozen, hands shaking violently, jaw slack, eyes locked on the father as though the last word spoken, Mayor, still echoed inside his skull like a detonating mine. Rowan stepped forward, voice low and steady. Everyone stay where you are. No sudden movements. But he already knew that command meant nothing. The shed was no longer a hiding place. It was a trap. The truth they'd unearthed had made them visible. And someone out there wanted that truth buried deeper than any body. Branches snapped outside, multiple sources, closing in from different angles. Jake finally spoke, voice raw. The mayor, Mayor Albrich? He's been in office for 30 years. He's practically Maple Hollow's founder. The father cut him off quietly. Power dug the graves, not Lennox. Jake reeled backward, breath quivering. Rowan turned toward him. Jake, listen to me. Whoever's out there is coming for all of us. We need to move. Jake nodded weakly, but his eyes remained locked on the father. How long? He whispered. How long did Halbridge do this? The father met his gaze without hesitation. Longer than you've been alive. Jake staggered again. The weight of those words hit him harder than the gun he'd dropped moments earlier. Outside, voices emerged, muffled, commanding, coordinated. Fan out. Check the perimeter. He couldn't have gotten far. Orders from the mayor himself. No survivors. Rowan's stomach clenched. We need to get out. But the father shook his head. There's no leaving. Not through the door. Rowan scanned the shed. Windows were boarded, walls rotted. The door now surrounded by approaching shadows. Even if they fought their way past the first wave, the forest was closing in with forces that knew this ground better than any outsider. Evan stepped closer to Rowan. There's a way out, he said quietly. But it's not one they'll expect. Rowan locked onto him. Where? Evan pointed downward. The floor. Alden whimpered. No, we can't, that's where. Evan cut him off sharply. It's the only way. Rowan crouched, feeling along the floorboards. There's a crawl space? Bigger, Evan said. Originally a storm shelter. My father used it for what he needed to hide. He hesitated. Before any of this, the father didn't deny it. Rowan ripped up a loose plank. Beneath it, darkness, cold and deep, with a draft that carried the smell of earth and old metal. Jake swallowed. You expect us to crawl in there? I expect you to survive, Evan replied. Rowan didn't hesitate. Everyone down. Now. Alden crawled forward shakily. Harold knelt beside him, face contorted with fear. Wallace lay limp, whispering apologies to no one. Rowan pulled him upright. Sheriff, move. But Wallace's eyes were hollow. I should have stopped this, I should have. Move, Rowan ordered. Another voice outside snapped through the air. He's in the shed. Surround it. Jake panicked. They know we're here, they know. Rowan grabbed Jake's collar, pulling him eye to eye. You want justice for your sister? Then move. Jake nodded, breath shaking, and climbed into the darkness. A booming crash hit the shed door. The hinges groaned. They were kicking it in. Rowan turned to the father. You're coming too. But the father stayed still. No. Evan's head jerked toward him. Father. It was always going to end this way, the father said softly. I've been running from this longer than any of you. It's time. He handed Evan something, small, metallic, wrapped in old cloth. A key. Take them through the tunnel, he murmured. Lock it behind you. I'm not leaving you, Evan said, voice breaking. You already did, the father replied gently. The moment you told the truth. The shed door cracked again with splintering. Boots slammed against the frame in brutal rhythm. Rowan reached out. This isn't the time for martyrdom. The father smiled faintly. This isn't martyrdom, detective. This is cleanup. Before Rowan could respond, the father turned to Alden, who flinched like a struck animal, and rested a hand on the trembling man's shoulder. You are not the villain your mind created, he said quietly. Fear is not a crime. Alden sobbed, collapsing into his embrace. Then the father shoved him toward the tunnel. Go! Another kick. The door cracked at the center. Evan's voice shook. Father, please, come with us. The father looked at him with a gaze that held years of pain and something that might have been love. Take care of your brother. Then he turned away, walking toward the door as calmly as if he were greeting neighbors. Rowan grabbed Evan's arm. Evan down. Now. Evan hesitated only a beat, then dropped into the dark, pulling Alden with him. Harold followed. Jake climbed deeper, hand covering his mouth to stifle his breath. Rowan shoved Wallace down next, then swung himself into the black space, feeling cool earth press against his palms. "Go," the father whispered above them. The door exploded. Gunfire erupted, deafening, sharp, echoing through the entire cabin. Rowan dragged the floorboard shut from below just as a burst of splinters rained down. Evan slammed a latch into place, sealing them into darkness. But in the muffled chaos above, Rowan heard the unmistakable sounds of struggle, heavy impacts, furniture crashing, men shouting, and the father's voice, a low, guttural roar, fighting back. Then a gunshot. 1, 2, 3. Evan froze in the tunnel, breath trapped in his throat. Alden whimpered. Harold covered his ears. Jake clenched his jaw so hard it cracked. Rowan placed a hand on Evan's shoulder in the darkness. "Move. Now." They wormed forward through the tunnel, a narrow throat of earth that twisted beneath the forest. The air was cold and damp. The walls seemed to pulse with tension. Above them, footsteps thudded across the shed floorboards. Multiple sets, searching. Voices filtered through the earth. "Nothing here, trapdoor. Find the tunnel. Find them." Rowan's heart hammered. "Faster." Evan crawled ahead, guiding with touch alone. "This leads to the old lumber station. It opens into a drainage trough behind the ridge." "How far?" Jake hissed. "Far enough if we don't stop," Evan said. Behind them, the tunnel shook. Men above had found the floor hatch. Ripping, tearing. Rowan urged everyone forward. "Go, go." The earth groaned as footsteps dropped into the opening. Pursuit had begun. Alden breathed in panicked gasps. "We're going to die. We're going to die down here." "No," Rowan said. "Not today." They reached a fork. Evan took the left path, moving faster than before. "This way." Rowan followed, Wallace dragging behind him like a broken doll. The pursuit grew louder. Closer. Jake whispered, trembling. Why my family? Why Emily?" Evan didn't look back. Because she saw what others refused to see. Because she didn't stay quiet. The tunnel air tightened, closing in with the weight of 2 decades of buried secrets. Suddenly, a faint light appeared ahead. A sliver of gray. "Hope." Evan's voice rose. "Almost there. Keep." A gunshot tore through the tunnel's tail end, ricocheting off stone. Dirt rained from the ceiling. Someone screamed. "Move!" Rowan shouted. They lunged for the exit. Evan reached it first, throwing his shoulder against the rusted grate. It groaned, resisted, then snapped open with a shriek that echoed through the underground like metal bending in pain. One by one they climbed out into the forest air, cold, sharp, alive. Jake, Alden, Harold, Wallace barely conscious, Rowan last. Evan slammed the grate shut, just as dark figures spilled into the tunnel behind them. "Run!" They bolted up the ridge, lungs burning, branches slashing their arms, roots dragging at their feet. The forest erupted with gunfire below. Bullets cracked through bark. Echoes boomed like thunder. Evan led them through a thicket, over a fallen tree, down a ravine, across a creek that swallowed their footprints. They didn't stop until their bodies gave out, collapsing behind a rise hidden by dense pines. Silence returned, thin, trembling, but real. Rowan lay on his back, chest heaving, staring at the gray sky. "We need to get to my car," he gasped. "Call state authorities. Federal if we can." Jake nodded shakily. "They killed him," he whispered. "They killed my dad. Your father, they killed." Evan didn't answer. He stared at the ground, hands clenched, jaw trembling, not with grief, with resolve. Rowan sat up slowly. "Evan, what's going through your head?" Evan lifted his gaze, and Rowan saw something new in his eyes. Not fear, not brokenness, not the empty calm of a man who'd accepted his past, but purpose. "They think the truth is buried," Evan said softly. "They think by killing him they silenced the past." He stood. "They don't understand. The past didn't die today. Evan looked at Rowan. It was not a plea. It was a pact. It woke up. Rowan nodded. Then we finish what he started. Evan stepped forward, emerging from the trees like a shadow finally choosing a direction. We're going after the mayor. Rowan rose beside him. Jake wiped his tears and stood. Alden hesitated, shaking, but stood. Harold swallowed and stood. Even Wallace, broken and shaking, pushed himself upright. The forest behind them whispered with the weight of all they had escaped. The future ahead whispered with all they still had to expose. Rowan took a breath. Let's end this. And together they walked out of the woods, toward the truth that had been buried for 25 years, toward the man who believed he was untouchable, toward the final reckoning of the Oregon 1997 cold case that no longer belonged to the past.